everyone. I'm Dr. Lucy Santos Green. I'm a professor of information science at the University of South Carolina, co-editor of School Libraries Worldwide, the journal for the International Association of School Librarianship, and also the leader of a fantastic project that we are starting here with many of the folks that you'll meet today, the Get Ready, Stay Ready Community Activism Toolkit. And we'll touch base on that a little bit later on. It's my pleasure to introduce y'all to Stacy Collins. Stacy is going to start us off today. She is the librarian for children's literature and social work, as well as the curriculum and research coordinator at Simmons University Library. And she was also named a 2021 Mover and Shaker by Library Journal. Stacy is going to be joining us here on stage and going to be talking to us about some really key terminology that I think we use casually and sometimes don't delve into with kind of the focus and attention that we need to. So Stacy, if you'll join me, we can begin our journey through what the conversation is for today.
Thank you, Lucy. So welcome, everyone. As Lucy said, I'm going to give sort of a general overview of some of the concepts and some of the issues that are behind book banning. Book banning is a term we hear a lot, sometimes as a good thing, sometimes as a threat. But I just want to sort of break down what we're really talking about from kind of a library and educator position, but also what community members should know as well. All right, and I'm just going to get us started with some fantastic and sadly extremely relevant quotes. So this first one is from Ray Bradbury, where he says that you don't have to burn books to destroy a culture. You just have to stop people from reading them. And this is a quote from 1993. Folks maybe have heard it before or seen it written before. And this is now 30 years ago, and it rings as true and as relevant today as ever. And it's echoed in a quote just from this very year, just actually a few weeks ago, from Nicole Hannah-Jones, saying that healthy societies do not ban books. We have many options for dissent and discussion and conversation and contention and controversy at our disposal, that we don't need to destroy or eliminate access to books in order to challenge them or engage with the ideas that are in them. And so it's actually really concerning when we see upticks in book banning, and quite frankly, we see these upticks quite regularly for a society that likes to hold itself up as a great democracy interested in upholding rights like intellectual freedom, to have access to different ideas from lots of perspectives, and that access makes us better and stronger as a society. All right. So a few terms to know, and again, these are going to be things that folks have maybe heard before, especially if you've already been looking into this. But we often hear book ban, but we don't necessarily hear challenged. But if you follow the American Library Association, who keeps track of some of the statistics around challenges and bans, you'll always see challenges and bans listed together, and it's because they're closely linked. So a book challenge is any attempt to remove or restrict materials that could be books or other media, based upon the objections of either a single person or a group of people. A ban is the actual removal of the materials from a library, from a collection, or from a curriculum in a school. And the difference is sort of key here, because NALA collects the statistics on challenges as well, because not every challenge is successful in getting material removed, but every challenge to a book matters, right? Every attempt to remove material is also concerning, is also an issue that needs to be looked at and addressed and challenged where possible. All right. So within this idea of challenging and banning, we have some things that are fuzzy. Mainly because it's a lot easier to talk about things with simple sound bites, with just a few words, and that's why we hear banning more than we hear challenging. But banning is actually also itself kind of an umbrella term that covers a lot of behaviors and actions that folks can take. And sort of breaking that down and unpacking it is really important when we talk about how we're going to challenge and how we're going to disrupt this process of eliminating access to material. So what I have here is what's called the 4 Rs. So this is actually coined and a research area of Dr. Emily Knox. She's a professor at the School of Information Sciences at the University of Illinois, and she researches, among other things, information access, intellectual freedom, and censorship. And their connections to social justice and some of like the foundational pieces of our society. Fascinating work. I highly recommend it. But she quite literally wrote the book on book banning, and it is this one pictured right here, Book Banning in 21st Century America. So Dr. Knox calls book banning an imprecise catch-all term, and she prefers to speak about people engaging in censorship practices, what she calls the 4 Rs, which we've listed here. So the first R is redaction, which is just crossing out a word or covering up an image. If folks are familiar with Maurice Sendak's In the Night Kitchen, with the little naked guy running around the kitchen at night during his dreams, there was actually a big sort of wave of folks drawing a diaper over him, just basically sort of eliminating the nudity in question, just so it wouldn't be objectionable at all. That's an example of redaction. We also, of course, have the quick blacking out of a word that folks don't like, and then putting the book back on the library shelf, or returning it to the library, returning it to the classroom. The second R is relocation. This is, like it sounds, when you move material from one place to another, but it is for the purposes of removing it from one audience to another. So this would be if a book is taken from a section of the library that is aimed at, say, middle school readers and younger, moving that to a YA section or even an adult section to sort of not necessarily eliminate access, but to make it a lot harder to find and unlikely to be discovered by chance. Our third R is restriction. This is when you require permission or you simply outright disallow access to material based on lots of things. It could be the age of a library patron. It could be the class that someone is in at school. But essentially, there needs to be very specific circumstances, and the idea is to make those circumstances as specific and as small as possible in order to get access to the material. And then the last one is removal, and this is most likely what you're thinking of when you hear of a book ban, where material is actually withdrawn in order to eliminate access to it. All right. So with all that terminology now floating around your head, let's actually bring this into some real world context. So PEN America actually just put out a really chilling report on some recent numbers. You can actually find it online, but I just pulled out a couple of key numbers from it. And I'm gonna move through these to talk a bit about them, but to give you a little bit of context, based on the statistics that the American Library Association has been keeping, in 2018 there were 483 unique book challenges. In 2019, 566, and in 2020 we saw a massive drop, no doubt because of the pandemic, but we saw a massive drop in book challenges and bans, down from 566 to 273. Now, between July of 2021 and March of 2022, over 1,100 unique books were targeted. That is, let's see, I think that's 9 months. No, more than 9 months. Less than a year. In less than a year, we are seeing over twice as many unique, meaning individual, books being challenged. And that is frightening. And it's worth thinking about what it is telling us about what's happening in our society and what books and access to books represents in that sort of discourse and development. Quick here on the second bullet point here is really looking at where these books were targeted. So covering 86 school districts across 26 states, representing over 2 million students. So 2 million students having either their access to books challenged or fully rescinded, where those folks do not have access to those books anymore. And unsurprisingly, the books that are being targeted are overwhelmingly marginalized main characters, issues, and themes. 41% of the 41% of the books targeted included prominent characters of color. 22% directly addressed issues of race and racism. 33% explicitly addressed LGBTQ plus themes or had characters who identified as LGBTQ plus. And then this last number is interesting, where we saw an enormous uptick in books being challenged that were in fact nonfiction, biographies, historical overviews, etc., that had themes around related to rights and to activism. So coming back to some of these issues around race and racism and around queer issues, but specifically the idea of fighting for justice for those marginalized groups were now being challenged. So an enormous uptick in a very short period of time. It is not by accident, right? It's not a big coincidence. These books are being targeted. The particular books that are targeted in the numbers that it is happening, and the organization, the coordination that is behind, pushes for the banning of books, is by design. And I'd even go so far as to call it an insidious design. And what's at stake here is pretty enormous in terms of what we value in our society, in terms of the freedom to read, and what the autonomy of exploring ideas and themes and books and words, what that represents, sort of at the very foundations of our nation, our sort of nation's selfhood, etc. But we also have some very serious stakes that are coming up for young readers who don't have the right to vote yet, don't have a lot of rights, but the right to read and the right of intellectual freedom is one that they've had forever, and now it's being challenged.
All right, so thanks for that crucial overview, Stacy. And what I want to now bring up is why. Again, why should we care? Why should these issues be concerning to you and to me? Why, as a parent, should you care? Why, as a caregiver, should you care? Why, as a community member, should you care? So we are bringing together some key voices today to talk through these things. And I want to take a minute and invite everyone else that's on the panel today to join us. And as soon as everyone's on stage, I will go through and introduce the luminaries. So starting with Stacy, who I introduced earlier. So Stacy can wave. Liz Hahn is our next panelist. Liz is a 15-year veteran teacher of English and AP Language and Literature in the great state of Georgia. Her husband served over 20 years in the Air Force before also becoming a Georgia high school teacher. And so Liz, along with being a high school teacher, is a community activist and also a mother to 5 children, ranging in ages from 6 to 22. So she is bringing all kinds of perspective to today's conversation. The next 2 panelists that I would like to highlight are Meenal McNary and Kiana Pitts. And so I'll ask them to wave. Meenal and Kiana are parents and leaders in the Round Rock Black Parents Association, fantastic group. It's a strong grassroots organization that partners with other community activists, organizers, nonprofits, and businesses to advocate for equity within the greater Austin, Texas area. And of course, Texas has been a central part of many of these conversations over the last year. Our RBPA aims to educate others on racial and educational equity through their partnerships, as well as unify and empower parents to be leaders within their schools. And I also have the great joy of welcoming Kiana's oldest daughter, Tierney, if you want to wave, who is a high school senior and here joining us today. So we're thrilled to have her here. And then last but not least, I have the honor of introducing Kyle Lukoff, who is the author of the middle grade novel Too Bright to See, a novel that was shortlisted for the National Book Award. So congratulations. He also wrote the Stonewall Award-winning picture book, When Aiden Became a Brother, which is a crucial work. I encourage all of you to go read it today. And he's also the author of Max and Friends and a really great collection of early reader books. But prior to becoming an author, he was a full-time school librarian. He was an elementary librarian in New York City. And he spent 8 years working with children from preschool through 5th grade, teaching literature and research skills, as well as helping kids and their parents connect with books and reading. So this is the amazing group of people that we have here today. And as I welcome them, Stacy, I'm going to kick it over back to you to start us off on why we should care about this issue.
Thanks, Lucy. Okay, so you've heard some real world context, some terminology behind this. So let's talk a little bit about stakes. So I want to start with the ever relevant and massively impactful Rudine Sims Bishop quote. This is a quote from 1990, and again rings as true today as it did then. But she talks about the massive importance of books as windows, as mirrors, and as sliding glass doors. So I'm just going to read through the quote to sort of set the tone for not only what we're talking about when we talk about why we should care, but also what's going to be addressed in the Q&A. So she says, books are sometimes windows, offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through in imagination to become part of whatever world has been created or recreated by the author. And when lighting conditions are just right, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us, and in that reflection, we can see our own lives and experiences as part of the larger human experience. Reading, then, becomes a means of self-affirmation, and readers see their mirrors in books. So, I mean, I have no real words to follow that other than to say, one of the core pieces that I think Dr. Bishop is addressing there, and one of the main reasons to care about books disappearing from shelves, comes down to empathy, comes down to core values as a society, but often core values that are held dearly by parents, by people who grew up with books that changed their lives, that changed the way they saw the world, that changed the way they saw other people. And that really is sort of rooted in this idea that empathy is only possible when we're able to relate and expand our perspective to include those who are different from us. And books are one of the most powerful ways to do that.
And so I want to ask the panelists to make sure you unmute your mics. And the first question I want to ask is tied to this quote that we just read and this thought that Stacy shared. Year after year, the top challenged and banned books not only have content in common, but also audience. So from your perspectives, we have educators, librarians, authors, caregivers, we have students, and of course, all of us readers. Why? Why are we targeting children's and young adult books? Why are we damaging the windows, the mirrors, and the sliding doors? What is going on?
Well, I'm going to start with something, if I can, that, pops up on my social media all the time. And one of the things that gets talked about is, if you're afraid that a book is going to change someone's way of thinking, you're not afraid of books, you're really afraid of thinking, right? It's one of those things that pops up all the time. And, we know that in our younger years, very formative years, we're being exposed to other people and other ideas. And literature, as a literature teacher, this is close to my heart, is one of the best ways to do that. It is the way we create empathy. And children learn to think outside the box and be open to other people's experiences and be open to considering things they hadn't considered before. And I think that in this effort, this pushback, the desire is to really curb and control, those formative years, so that instead of what we're seeing with our children, at least what I see in the classroom, as I see kids, even when they come from various perspectives and backgrounds, they come in and they're more open to one another as a whole. And I think that that's scary to certain segments of our population, that we are embracing diversity, embracing people of different backgrounds on a larger scale, that kids are doing this. And it's creating these thinkers, and there's kind of this pushback on that, and it becomes part of the culture war in my mind. But anyway, I'll turn over.
I feel that same way, because often I always think of my little kids as sponges. From the day they were born, I was like, they're little sponges. They're just soaking up all of this knowledge and just soaking everything in. And so what a time to have them see themselves, have them see other people. And if you don't approve of something or you don't accept something, you don't want them to see that, because you know that they're soaking it all in and they're forming their opinions about things and about the world. And so we are really trying to shield them and mold them into something that we want them to be, when no, that's not our job. Like, let them be who they are, and let them see themselves in literature, because they go out seeking that when they're finding themselves, their identity, learning who they are, how they're, how they fit in the world, what it means to, to just be in the world. And we're trying to shut that down. And why? And when I say we, like the society, why?
Yeah.
As a student, I think there's also a lot of fear going in, like especially like the middle school to high school, where you're like officially like thinking for yourself. And I think that books are definitely how I ended up doing that, reading these things I was interested in and forming these thoughts. And I think there's a lot of fear in our society. Just change in general is always so hard, because it's like there's so much like keeping you from moving forward. And then as we're growing up and we're realizing, we're like, why is this not a widely accepted idea? And then you turn around and ask your parents, they're like, well, it's always been like that. And then you're asking why, and you're trying to understand how these things work. And I think there's definitely a lot of fear. I always hear that like especially with book banning with like CRT based, they're always like, oh, like we don't want you to think that you're the bad person, but it's really like the older people, like they don't want you to see them as the bad people, because they continue to let that happen. And it's not that we're shouldn't learn it, like they're trying to erase their part in it. And even though it's just like it's just like a part of the learning and how you move forward and learn from your mistakes, rather than just hide them and like try and curve your like learning like around it. And I just think that we end up, especially with like social media, we'll end up finding it anyways. And I think that trying to control it leads to bad exposure, because then you're not seeing it from the right outlets and like safe outlets, I guess.
First, I want to say that I'm actually very intimidated to be talking on this panel. And I'm really glad to be here with all of you. And I'm also thinking about how everything that everyone is saying is true, but there are so many other true ways to answer this question. And the thing that is sort of in my mind right now is this idea of why moral panics often focus on children and fears about children being threatened. Like we know that parents will go to literal war to keep their children safe, whether it's their like specific children in their families or this idea of the future as represented by young people. And I think that many people know that the easiest way to get people on your side is to convince them that their children are in danger. Yeah. And a lot of the rhetoric that we're seeing being pushed now is saying your children are in danger from trans people, your children are being endangered by queer people, your children are being endangered by like radical Black activists, like white children are in danger. Obviously, that should go without saying that it's the white children who are like endangered by those activists. And promoting that message is the best way to get many parents to go along with whatever will keep their children from harm. And one of those actions right now is keeping books from libraries. But of course, we know that it's not really about keeping books from libraries. It's seeing libraries as a reflection of society and trying to remove books as a way of also paving the way to remove people.
Mm-hmm.
It hits me in a weird way when I think about it from the perspective of youth activism. It's interesting to me that we had this growth in youth activism happening, especially when we looked at the mass shooting that happened in Florida. And from there, we saw these teen activists that really, really took a leading role in pushing for more, a safer educational setting for themselves. And as we see youth activism and youth voice, we see the, little incidences with, social media being used to insert their voice in political campaigns, for example, in a way that was not possible before. So I find it interesting when I think about that. And then what Tierney brought up, which is this fear that youth now have their own opinions and they're not, and have a platform to voice those opinions and share those thoughts. And so what are we really trying to do here when we ban these books? Are we, like Liz is saying, are we banning the book, or are we banning the ability that someone has to think through something, to confront a deeply held tradition or belief? And yeah, Kyle, it ties into what do we want? What do we perceive as danger for our kids? Well, is part of that a little self-centered, where we're seeing a danger in them seeing us as less than ideal, as less than perfect? And so we restructure our history by deleting it, large swaths of it. So yeah, it's a very complex, I think, multi-threaded thing that asks us to really think more deeply. Why do you, person here, why do you have the instinct to make this unavailable? Why do you want to silence this topic or this viewpoint or this person? What are you trying to protect? Who from who? So that is a key point, I think, that y'all all brought out there today. I have another question for y'all that I want you to think through. And this is about the NCTE students' right to read. Beyond the First Amendment, what does a student's right to read mean to you? As students, as professionals, as citizens, as adults who share a community with children and with teens, and vice versa. What does a student's right to read mean to you?
I'd like to start with my oldest son, Jaden. He's 12 and he's in 7th grade, and he's loved to read ever since he was little bitty. I used to read stacks of books to him at night to get him to go to sleep. Finally, I had to resort to reading Moby Dick to get him to go to sleep at night. So, his love for reading was ingrained at such a young age. And as I've seen him grow into this young boy, the choices that he makes and what he chooses to read are not guided by me, but they're guided by what his love is. And it's really cool to see the science fiction genres, the historical genres, the books that are about him as a Black boy and him being centered as a young Black boy. Those are important, that he has the ability to choose things that, one, make him happy, and that, two, he can center himself, because so often as a young Black boy, he is not centered in America. And it's just beautiful to see. So to me, it's love. It is a parent's love. And that's what it means. And then in the farther reach in the community, in Round Rock, in Austin, in Texas, and nationwide, it's developing that empathy, allowing children to read books that they can choose because they're curious to learn about my son next door who has curly hair and he has darker skin than them, and they've never really talked about what we talk about at home, but they've heard it when they come over to our house, and now they're interested. That's what that means.
Love for yourself and love for other. That's beautiful.
For me, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Kyle.
That's the hardest thing about Zoom.
No, that's okay.
So for me, I always So when I was a school librarian, for me, maintaining a student's right to read meant seeing young people and children, no matter how old they were, as entire human beings with full emotional and intellectual landscapes that did not belong to me, did not belong to their parents, did not belong to their teachers, that were entirely their own creation, just as my emotional and intellectual landscape belongs to me alone. And it required not seeing children as like blank slates that I could tell them what to do and then they would do it, because that's not how anyone works. And it also meant seeing children as whole human beings and not just as the future adults that they might become if I give them the right things to read. It meant acknowledging that kids will read books that I don't necessarily think are right for them, and that kids might read something that will give them a nightmare, and then maybe they'll learn from it and maybe they won't. It means letting a kid check out the same pop-up book 6 weeks in a row because they want to, and they're allowed to do that because they're human beings who get to make their own choices. And that, I think, is hard for a lot of people who profess to care about children to grasp, that children are entire human beings who, with the exception of, I don't know, like taking a bath and like getting vaccinated and not running into traffic, like aside from like literally keeping them safe, physically safe, children are in fact human beings who also get to make mistakes and also get to make their own choices.
I'm trying to decide how I want to phrase this, but as Lucy said, I'm a mom all the way from my elementary school son who's in first grade right now up to my adult son who's actually 23 now. So, and so I have kids at all ages and stages and kind of all perspectives. I absolutely agree with what Kyle said, and seeing them as whole people, and and with the ability to think and reason and express interest in things and grasp things on various levels depending on where they are. And then I see this as we look at these challenges and these bans, and I look at it from a parent perspective. So I'm going to separate myself totally from the teacher perspective for a second, just as a parent. I want my children to be treated like whole individuals. And then I also recognize the right of parents, right, to engage in conversations with their kids, to talk about different things around the dinner table, or as my daughter Catherine and I, she's 11, we go on walks and she wants to spill the tea, as we're walking, and she's going to talk to me about whatever she's going to talk to me about as we're walking along. And then I have that interaction with her as a parent, and I get to answer questions for her, and we go back and forth. And that is the right that we all have as parents. But then good parents also are willing to expose their kids and let them think and let them figure things out. And what I see happening all the time right now as an educator and also as a parent is parents that want to come in and enforce their personal agendas on more than just their children, try to, push their conversations on everyone's child because of the fear that we talked about before. And I think, I am desperate, and and as an educator and a parent, but desperate as a parent to protect my children's right to be exposed to all the different things and to act as whole individuals. And that's where, I think that we have to realize how important what we are talking about actually is. From a parent standpoint, from an activist standpoint, from an educator standpoint, that is exactly what's at threat, is what Kyle's talking about. Are our children whole individuals? Do they have the right to kind of see themselves and see others and develop that empathy? And that is so scary to me as a parent, that anyone would try to come and take that away from my child. My children are beautiful, unique individuals, who have seen themselves, seen others. Lucy, you talked about the political activism. My daughter Abby, when she was in high school, was part of that March for Our Lives group. She and 3 other friends led the march in our conservative county, and you got out there and the kids turned out and they talked about it and they read things about it and they engaged with one another. My daughter Catherine, she has a pride flag hanging in her room. She's 11 years old, but she has seen herself and seen others, and that's part of what she's coming to grips with as an 11-year-old, as a 4th grader right now. she needs the opportunity to do that. No one needs to limit it. No one needs to limit it. And that right has to remain fundamental even for our kids. Rights don't just exist for us as adults, they exist for our children.
Mhm. Tierney, are you comfortable addressing this? I would love to hear from you as a student. How do you define your personal right to read? What does that mean to you?
For me, it's definitely along the lines of what Kyle was saying. It's definitely a lot of exposure and a lot of like recognizing that like I'm 18 right now, but like all throughout middle school, I'm forming my own thoughts and opinions, and it's just like my right to learn about these things and like in the timely manner that I want to. Like if I was obsessed with Greek mythology when I was little. Like my librarian, she showed me all types of books, and she would direct me to like Roman mythology, and then I got into that, and she would just like she would never like, oh, why don't you read this type of book? Like she's just like, here, I heard that you like this right now. Here's some more options, and she exposed me to so many things, and now I'm just like a diehard like Rick Riordan stan. Like I read all of the Egyptian mythology he writes. I read it all now because like my librarian in elementary school, she just showed me all these options and not was like, oh, like this is what kids on your level are reading right now. Like she would show me everything, and just like all of the librarians would that I encountered in like my public school experience were always like showing me multiple options. And then even at my school, even at Cedar Ridge, like there's a cart that has like some of the books that have been in question recently, like the stamp, like stamped, like they have those books like on a cart that makes them even more easily accessible than like going to find them in the shelves. And so I think it's just about having that exposure, and that, I mean, not even or just recognizing that students have that choice to read them too, because taking it away completely means that like we don't get that exposure at all, and it doesn't stop you from developing your thoughts on your own. It just makes it harder to like find your place within it as a student. And so I just think it's about having like the right to choose what you want to read and like how you want to do it, when you want to be exposed to it, and having that right being questioned, and like having people try and decide when is a good time for me to be exposed to this thing. Like that's, that just hinders like my personal growth in the future.
Such good points. Thank you, Tierney. Stacy, I'm going to bring you back on real quickly because I want to ask you to address one of the ideas about why this is, again, something that you should care about as a parent, you should care about as a caregiver, as a community member. We talk about how the limiting of a student's right to read limits our empathy, limits their ability to become critical thinkers, but also this idea that it impacts a parental role. It weakens the parental role by allowing other parents and caregivers to determine your child's access to information and how these decisions should be personal. And we've touched on that a little bit here in our discussion, and not replaced by other parents, but also not replaced by the library. And so, Stacy, I was hoping you could speak to that point, this concept of the library stepping in as a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll first speak as a parent. I'm also a parent. My toddler doesn't read yet, but loves words on pages, loves pictures, loves books as objects, as the sound of my voice, the sound of I don't know, adventure and fun and sleepy time, etc. And I am very unhappy with the idea that my child's reading world is being restricted, is being condensed, being shrunk before they're even ready to fully enter it on their own, with their own interests and their own exploration of ideas that are on pages. It makes me sort of want to run out and like buy every book in existence, which unfortunately is not super possible. but yes, so as a parent, I abhor the idea that somebody is taking away from me and away from my kid the fullness of a reading landscape, and the fullness of ideas that are out there. As a librarian, it pulls up some problematic pieces of the way that the library has been situated in sort of our cultural mindset. So, on the one hand, we have the library as a community space, a coming together, a gathering, a place. I think this has been floating around the internet forever that it's one of the last places you can exist as a human being and not be expected to buy something. This idea that you're a public good, that access to information is valuable to our society, and the library is one of the conduits for information to reach our communities. The problem is when a community role gets tangled up in this idea of I won't call it parental rights, because it's not like folks have already been saying, it's not really the right to be able to control access to material. But this idea that the library as a community space is supposed to be responsive to everybody individually as opposed to responsive to the community as a whole. And the conflation of that is a lot of where the tension that we're seeing about the library as a space where young readers can find books on their own, can pull a book off a shelf, discover something new, without any intervention whatsoever, other than what was put on the shelf to begin with, and having a library card to check it out. There is nothing between them and those words. And that is frightening for a lot of folks who are invested in making sure that only certain information, certain perspectives, certain ideas are forwarded in our society. And so the library becomes this space where there's an argument around, well, shouldn't you be, like, you can't give my kids access to things that I don't think are okay. And it's like, well, we really can. You can take them away at any point. Like, no one is stopping you from being your child's parent within the library, outside of our doors, in the car on the way home. You can be the parent with the standards for reading and the interventions that you wish to put in place. But it is not our role, nor could we possibly take it on, to be you as a parent behind the desk, or on the library shelves, or in the children's and YA reading rooms. Nor should we be, right? We are responsive to the community as a whole, not individual folks' idea of what the community is or should be, but the community as it is in real life.
Yeah, key point. And one that I do ask, also another thing I mentioned before, things to self-reflect. So this is something that I'm also asking people who are joining us, watching this presentation today, that you self-reflect a little bit and ask yourself, how are you dividing those roles in your mind? How are you dividing the concept of the library's relationship to the community as a whole, as it exists in reality, versus how you envision the library's role in your family and dealing with what your ideal of a community would be? And so that's a great point, Stacy, and one that I think also asks us to reflect and question. Kyle, I want to turn over to you for a while and ask you a question about age appropriateness. I want to have you kind of kick us off a little bit on this. And I know that this has been something that's been kind of thrown at you recently and in many undeserved ways. And so I'm very anxious to hear what you have to say. Age appropriateness is a term and a justification for book challenges. And we're hearing this over and over and over again. Age appropriateness, rarely defined. There's this presumption that everyone shares a single interpretation of what age appropriateness is. And we are similarly presumed to agree on the claim that representations of queerness, race, racism, even historical facts regarding activism, rights activism, like Stacy pointed out earlier in books, are contestable as age inappropriate. So what are your thoughts on this? And how should we respond to these ideas and arguments, again, about age appropriateness? So I'm going to ask you to kick us off on that conversation.
For those of you who can't see or weren't watching, I made a very sad face when Lucy said the word appropriate, which is my general response. It's just a sad face. One thing that I shared constantly with parents when I was a school librarian is that the best person to determine what's appropriate for a kid of a specific age is actually the kid,
Mm.
because so I see it over and over again. My colleagues see it over and over again. And it is even like borne out by like the research, is that children actually don't want to engage with topics that they are not developmentally ready for. So I've seen so many kids pick up a book, find out that there's kissing and it be like, ew, kissing is gross. They close it and they put it away because it's actually not appropriate for them to read about somewhat sexualized relationships, and they feel that in their gut. They're like, this is gross, I don't like it. And they put it back. I've had kids who have opened up a book about vampires and say, oh no, this is too scary for me. And they put it back. Time and again, I see that if children are not ready for something, they don't want to engage with it. And when they come to a point where they become ready for it, that's when they start looking for it. Parents are often, I've often had parents be afraid that their like child's innocence is going to be damaged. And that's like a whole thing by itself. But it's just not how that works. Like if a kid isn't ready to process something, it just goes over. Like either they don't want to engage with it or they literally don't notice it. I've had kids miss out on major plot points in books because they're not ready for it yet. So the concern that children will be damaged by encountering something that they're not ready for is objectively false. And I could point towards any number of pieces of evidence beyond my own anecdotes to prove that. So since we all know that that's not true, I can only believe that when someone says that, for example, my books, my picture books and my early readers, when someone says that those books are inappropriate, what they're saying is that they either believe that the children like those that I write about, which is to say like queer and trans kids, don't exist, or they are expressing their view for a future, which is a future where these children will cease to exist in one way or another. Whenever they say that they believe that books with same-sex families are inappropriate, when I hear them saying is that if these people are inappropriate to be around children, these children should just be removed from their families. When I hear people say that these topics are inappropriate for children, what I'm hearing them say is that this is a whole segment of the population that should be removed in one way or another. I always view it as a direct threat to my individual well-being and the well-being of my community. The end.
Well, I think with that too is that saying something is inappropriate, I think that's a cop-out, because I've done it myself. And I've said because I wasn't ready for the conversation. And so part of that fear, I'm not ready. My kid could be ready and are, ready. But me as the parent, I'm like, wait. Like I have a timing of what I want, what I think I want to introduce or when, and I wasn't ready. But that was some searching and some work that I had to do on myself, so that I realized, because like you said, well, if a kid, it'll go over their head or they won't want to read it. And so I just think that's something that I've dealt with in my own experience. And I know it was because I wasn't ready. My kids they were born ready. I always say that my kids were born ready, but I wasn't ready as a parent. And so that was some inner work that I had to do. And so I'm hoping that other parents, other adults in some of this, when we're, talking about what's not appropriate, that we start doing some work on our own, on our own self, to figure out why that is and what is it, because it's a conversation, and these are hard conversations that aren't ready to be had. A lot of conversation, and I just kind of want to tie it back into like race. Your kid, they're going to school, they're interacting in society with everybody, just interacting. And it's the adults. We're not ready for these conversations, but our babies are. And I just consider our children babies. I'm like, our kids they're ready. Yeah. And that's what makes our world so great. And they are the future. And so for me, I had to do some work on my own, but man, I'm so glad I did, because it was a quick, like, oh, hold on, who am I? I'm like, who am I to, determine what appropriate? And it was me. I wasn't ready, but you know what? I need to get ready because the future is now in our kids. And if we say that we are about kids and we love children and, we want what's best for them, adults, we have to be ready and we have to get ready.
I think for me with like reading like age appropriate books or whatever, like I mean, I read Twilight in like the sixth grade, like in full in a week. And I loved it. I was so obsessed. And there were some things I just literally just brushed over because I was, 12, like reading Twilight, which is literally like fan fiction for something else. And like it was like it was literally fan fiction for like 50 Shades. And I read it in sixth grade, and there are some things I literally brushed over because 12-year-old reading that in a week, I was bound to brush over regular plot points. But there are just some things that like I think when you read like you said, like I also said, like you literally brush over it, like, and sometimes it doesn't phase you, and then there's things, and I think that that's where it gets parents. I sometimes like, and especially with like things relating to like race and queerness, and where those things overlap. And for me, they overlap because as a Black queer student, I'm literally like, well, there's a lot of stuff going on, and I literally just don't even notice that like that's like an issue for some people. And like my younger sister, she reads Percy Jackson. There are queer characters in Percy Jackson. There's different, everyone's different, and she literally brushed over. There was like a character in the book that uses they them pronouns in like the Magnus Chase books, and she just read it and she's like, okay. And like, and that's so like reading, like when you're mature enough to handle those things, you're like, okay. And so sometimes if you have questions and you ask the parents, and then they're like, how do you know about that? And then that's when the whole age appropriateness thing comes in, because they're like, wait, we're like, my mom's like, oh, we're not ready to talk to you about that. But like, if I'm ready, then what? And so I think that's definitely it's a misused term, especially with these type of issues, because if racism is so inappropriate, then why was I experiencing it? Why was I born experiencing it if it's not appropriate for your 12-year-old kid? Like, so it's just things like that. Like if I knew I was different, then how come it's, inappropriate to see like She-Ra and Catch a Kiss or something in like the new She-Ra series? Like, why is that something bad? But I knew something was, I mean, it's just stuff like that. And so I think that we definitely need to rebrand or find a dictionary for some people or something for the term like age appropriateness. And I think that if the child is ready to ask you about it, then you should be ready to be open and listen and offer information where if they can't, get it from a book.
Very quick brag is that I was on the Stonewall committee that gave the honor to the second Magnus Chase book. It's like one of the best ever. That was me and my friends.
I thought, for me, what jumps out, an overlap between what Kyle was talking about and Kiana was referring to, is this concept of age appropriateness being so flexible, and you keep waiting for the magical age where it is appropriate. And it seems like really what is being said is that that age will never arrive, because the concept itself, it moves beyond discomfort. It's flat out disapproval and a desire to make that person, their identity, completely disappear. And so that discomfort from the part of the community member or the parent who doesn't, who claims it is age inappropriate, it's such a flexible term because there's no end in sight. There's no appropriate age, because again, if you just flip that over, it just has to be that way. You have this strange inability to ever come to that sense, that conclusion to yourself. All right, so moving on to a next question that I have for y'all. This one for Kiana before Kiana has to switch over to a different stage today. How does the community, all this discussion that we're having, so shifting it to the community, how does the community support students, authors, professionals when the books that represent them, that they read and that they create, they include in their work, are targeted? What is the role of community organizing in providing support and response?
And with that question, that just brings back to how we were able to fight the challenge that happened in our district, because there was a teacher who sounded the alarm like, hey guys, they're trying to, challenge, ban these books. And she was, just informed the community, the parent. I was alarmed because I'm like, wait a minute, you're trying to, you want to challenge or ban books that my kids are seeking out to see themselves. And so for me, in that earlier statistic, about 41% of the book challenges in this short period of time are characters of color, people of color. I'm like, wait, so you're wanting to ban like my kids' existence, what they're seeking out, that's what they're banning. And so that really caught my attention when a teacher was sounding the alarm, because I'm like, wait a minute, wait. And I saw, that was a problem for me because my child was seeking out books. She started a book club along with Mino's son, a book. They started a book club because they wanted to read books that center, Black characters, and they could see themselves. And I was like, wait, so the authors that they were just reading on their own because they wanted to were some of the ones that were being challenged. And so for me, that represented a ban on them. Like a ban on Black existence. And so we sounded the alarm. We are in an anti-racist group. It's called ACT, Anti-Racist Coming Together. And so this is the work that we've all been doing. We've been training together along, it wasn't just Black people in our group, it's not just white people. We're all coming together. We're learning how to be more anti-racist, and we're learning in community. And so when the community, we sounded that alarm into the community, we're like, hey, there's a teacher out here, and hey, let's get on and support this teacher. Let's support, this community. And it was just kind of like a ripple effect of everyone kind of all hands on deck. Because it was important, because you start challenging this one thing, and we already know that the LGBTQI plus community was next, because we're looking at the list, and I'm like, oh, wait, we're fighting for them too. And then wait, hold on, here's another thing, the history, that CRT. So it was like all of these things. And so the community has to come together, and we have to form a united front that, we're not banning anyone's existence. How? We're not going to do that. No matter what, what it is that's different, and it's really kind of, for me, it's just like this white supremacist culture. If you're different from that in any way, if you're not feeding into that, then they want, we don't want to talk about it. We don't need to have it front and center. We, just go away. And so that's not happening. And so that calls for all of us, for the community to sound the alarm, for the community to come to the front and be on the front lines fighting together.
I like what you said, Kiana, that this is not just, it's not banning a book, it's banning a person. It's banning the existence of an individual. And it's like what Kyle is saying, when you're saying to someone this is inappropriate or not acceptable, it's because the existence of that person is not welcomed. And so adding that face, personalizing that challenge is a powerful way to help community members understand what exactly is at stake here. And Stacy, and Meenal too, I haven't heard from you two on this, but do y'all have something to add on ways that communities can come together, and even some examples to help counter this effort as parents and as caregivers?
So I can kick off that answer with some. Well, okay, I'm gonna be a little bit of a downer for just for a second. And it is to say the community is essential in this work and in this fight, in part because not all of the professionals, not all of the librarians, not all of the educators are on our side. Some of them are on the side of the opposition. And in some cases, it's not even a question of being on the side of the opposition. Sometimes it is, we have professionals who are already carrying a greater burden of risk. And with these book bans, we are seeing more and more this overstepping overstepping of a line where it's not just contestable that this material is in, say, the library, but now it's become contestable that a queer or Black librarian is the librarian at your school. Their work as professionals is being questioned because of identities they hold. And that is a heavy amount of risk to carry, along with the banner for book bans, etc. There are folks who are facing a risk of criminalization, or at the very least a risk of losing their jobs and livelihoods. Support from the community is essential. Under the sort of the leadership from folks who are in it and can give you the background information, etc. But folks stepping up to take on the risk that others cannot shoulder is essential. But again, we also have folks who not everybody that is in these positions to connect students, to connect young readers with books are on the side of the angels, so to speak, and the community needs to have an intervention there as well. So parents, caregivers of young readers, community members whose identities are represented in these books that are being dismissed, that are being opposed and eliminated, it is one way to sort of stand up and again say that our community as it is has enormous value, and our community as it is deserves to be seen and represented. Our ideas and experiences and perspectives should be engaged with. Young readers should have the option and the choice to be able to explore ideas and perspectives that aren't theirs and that are theirs at the same time. And being able to support the professionals who are doing this work and circumvent the professionals who are standing in the way.
Mina, do you want to jump in? And
yes, so thank you, Stacy and Kiana. Specifically, when people are looking for, especially parents and community members are looking for ways to get involved or things to do outside of direct interaction with the professionals that are fighting this already, building up your public speaking power and confidence to go to a school board meeting. Look up your local school policy on filing grievances and look up the library policy. Be familiar with the policies in your school district. And then, as we did in Round Rock with Round Rock Black Parents Association and ACT and other local grassroots community groups, gather your coalition of people and just motivate everyone to show up, write a petition. All of these things work. A petition is what kept Stamp the Remix in our district's curriculum. A petition with 1,500 signatures. And then to follow up parents, students, caregivers speaking at a school board meeting. All of that is so important to voice and show that we are the majority. We are not the minority.
And Liz, do you have anything to add here? As I know you've been doing some parenting lately, parent activism lately.
Yeah, so, I was going to speak to what Stacy was talking about the people that feel under threat and feel like they can't speak, and a teacher that steps out and this kind of raises awareness. And it's really difficult for educators right now because we're the indoctrinators, right? In public education, there's this fear that we are indoctrinating. I don't have time to do that, but there's this fear that we are indoctrinating students all the time. And so teachers are afraid to speak out sometimes when these policies are being enacted and things are happening in their school district, right? We have to pay attention. So speaking outside the teaching thing for a second, as a parent, we have to pay attention and we have to be willing to put forth the same effort, sometimes a little bit more than some of these groups are doing that are doing the challenges and doing the attempted bans. And, one of the things that happened with me is I had the school district where my children attend, a lot of challenges, a lot of banning, a lot of things going on. It really started with those R's that Stacy talked about at the beginning. First, it started with redaction, right? And there was this effort toward redaction, and then things kind of progressed from there. And there was restriction when students expressed interest, and a librarian tried to bring in Dear Martin by Nick Stone. And the whole community freaked out. I mean, it went before a committee to be reviewed, and the committee had almost no people of color on it. And the one woman that had been on there walked off because of some of the things going on. And, and that community of teachers, the school district ultimately decided, no, we're not going to do this. Well, I taught in this school district for 10 years, and then I ended up moving out to a rural district. And what happened is teachers, secretly to me, Liz, this is what's going on with this book. And then, we started reaching out to like the local bookstore, and the local bookstore actually got Nick Stone to come into our community to do an open talk, and then she brought in, boxes of Dear Martin, and the bookstore helped to fund that. And, students showed up to hear her speak, and then students took stacks of books and handed them out to their friends, but and it was kind of that student activism piece that happened, facilitated somewhat by the community. And then I'm just going to piggyback on the comment about the school board speaking. I am guilty of the fact that as a teacher and even as a parent, I am busy all the time. I am trying to do good with my kids and in the classroom. And, those of us that are activists, we tend to be, really overcommitted and busy all the time. And I had stopped paying attention to the school board meetings. And then someone reached out to me and said, Liz, have you been paying attention to what's going on at the local school board? And I found that two primary groups, No Left Turn in Education and Refocus on Education, were sending people in nonstop to talk against the bluest eye. They wanted the bluest eye banned from the curriculum, against drama, this graphic novel that has someone in the LGBTQ plus community in it, and there's, those types of things. They're bringing all these efforts, and they were speaking at these school board meetings, every single meeting, like a group of them. And, and I was like, who else is speaking? Like, what other voices are out there? And I was like, okay, well, I can go speak. My husband's still a teacher in the community. I'm a teacher, I've got it. I can go speak, but who else is going to speak? I showed up we kind of put the word out on social media and just to parents in general. And I showed up to the school board meeting with my written 3-minute speech. They allow you 3 minutes. And I thought, oh, dear God, I'm going to be the only one speaking at this meeting that is on this other side, that is this other voice. And I'm watching the whole line of women that have been speaking every single meeting about how Jesus wouldn't be proud of what the students are reading, or whatever else is going on. And what happened in that moment was, as Meenal said, we are the majority. What happened in that moment is there were like 9 other speakers there that were there to speak up against the book banning, against the challenges, to say that their children needed to be seen. There were people talking about race, people of color saying my children need to be seen. There were parents of kids that are in the LGBTQ plus community. There were parents of kids with autism and parents, who stood up and said, our children need to be seen. And they all gave their 3-minute speeches. And it was like, we went one after another. And the people that had been speaking for the book bannings ended up being in the minority. And that has now remained the trend at every school board meeting, because parents stepped up and realized that I've got to pay attention and I need to say something. And they started advocating for their kids and for the community as a whole. We have to pay attention. Yeah. And if you're watching this and you're thinking, what can I do? I mean, that's a simple way to start with that school board meeting. It's just a simple way to start the conversations that we have to be willing to do something. I know we're all busy, but we've got to be willing to put in that 3 minutes, as uncomfortable as we might feel.
Thanks, Liz. So I want to wrap up today's panel with one last question. And this is probably a little bit deviating away from book banning, but I do think very much fed by book banning. And I'm throwing this out to the whole panel. What is the wider impact of these bans and the banning legislation and the censoring and the redaction and the relocation of books? What's at stake here for libraries and education, but also for publishing and for textbooks? For example, we know that Texas is currently leading with bans. Florida just announced what it considers it's a list of approved math textbooks. And so how does this impact other things beyond? We're also seeing challenges to search terms and databases where there's legislation out there where parents might be able to sue these companies. So what are the wider impact of these bans that y'all are seeing? And so I just want to throw it out there. Who wants to jump in?
For me, the wider thing is that it's hurting our children in the long run. Like when we talk about, for all the people out there who say that racism is over, any type of ism, anything that's not this mainstream white culture, if you fit outside of that box, that you're not accepted. We're moving backwards. When we know history, we will not repeat it. But if you keep us from knowing our history, we're going to repeat it. And I'm going to fight because I don't want to go back to the times. And so speaking as a Black woman, I know because I read the history books. I know because I have the oral history of my ancestors, the things that have been passed down through our family, and I don't want to go back. And so our kids are our future. And so in order to make a better world, we're going to have to continue to move forward. Change is hard, but it's so needed. And I mean, just those very foundational, like those dreams, I call them dreams that, that the founding fathers plan, just all of these liberties and this justice for, just the Constitution. Like, really, are we that America? Like, let's live it out. Let's live it out, because if we are, then we see us all. If we really are that. And so for me, that's what's at stake, is us going backwards.
So that's really horrifying, and that's what motivates me to keep fighting within our community. Besides the obvious trying to destabilize public education that's in the works, I think preventing us from becoming a fully functioning global society, that is what we are going to become if we continue down this path. Now, I fully believe this next generation on the come up isn't going to let that happen. I'm hoping they won't. But we need to fix our elders. We need to make sure that we're on the same page as our babies so that we can support them in their efforts.
Yeah, I really think that like what's at stake is definitely like the students in the long run, because we're not like shaping development how you want. Like you're hindering development, and you're hindering our ability to be functioning members of society if we only ever hear this one narrative. It's like and like if we only see that in the media, it's only going to change how much we go out of our way to like explore these things once we finally get out of that, like out from under that like rock that they're trying to keep us under. And so I think it'll just change the amount of productive years that we have, because every time someone goes to college, they're finding themselves still, like there's still some stuff. But if we're hindering from the very beginning, and then you finally make it out into the real world, like you're not going to be prepared. And so I think what's definitely at stake is that like our ability to think critically and also just function and like keep things from happening over again, because we're not learning about it, like my mom was saying.
I don't want to be the last person to talk because I don't want to end on a bummer, but I am a Jew, and I am a gay man, and I am a trans person, and I do believe that there are many people who have learned the history and who are bent on repeating it. I am very anxious about that.
And I just like to say that, what's at stake is the students. I'm going to jump on to what Tierney said. And as a teacher and as a parent, I had a powerful experience that I think I was sharing with you before, Lucy, where, Georgia is a conservative state, and I think there is a desire, a motivation to ban people that has been talked about up to this point, to ban things that don't look like what you want them to look like. And one of the most touching and powerful moments that I've had recently is when my daughter Catherine asked if she could go to Pride with me, because I was going to have a booth at Pride, and we were there, and Catherine wanted to do something, and she's 10 at this time, and she decided that she wanted to read some of her favorite children's books that we have read together, that are LGBTQ plus friendly children's books. And so we're sitting down, and she said, let's read books to the kids that are there, because the kids need activities too. And we sat down and we did that. And I was focused on the little kids, and we're reading. And then we stopped, and I looked up at everyone, and there was a group of my high school students who were at Pride, who were standing on the outside of the booth, and like 3 of them were crying because we were reading stories that represented them and their experience, gave them that mirror, and things that had been prevented or withheld from them at different points as they were going along in their own journeys. And they sat there. It was just this really impactful moment. That's what's at stake. It is the students of color. It's the marginalized students who won't get to see themselves. And I think there's just so much at stake there for my own children, for my students, for our community as a whole. I don't want to be a bummer either, but what I see every day terrifies me on that level.
Yeah.
I'm gonna hop on the bummer train to basically say it's important. It matters. It's not a bummer in the sense, I mean, it is, but, and I'm forgetting the exact quote, but there is something about how terrible this is that can either be something that leads to despair, or it can lead to burning everything down and addressing what is sort of rotting underneath. And I was going to say that book bans are a canary in the coal mine, but they're not. It's actually more, they're one of those temperature raises on the boiling the frog, right? Starting out in cold water. They are one of the ways that the temperature gets turned up. And it is not a coincidence that we are seeing parallel legislation as we're seeing book bans not just being challenged, not just being brought by individual parents, individual groups, but actually showing up in legislation. We are seeing parallel moves where, yes, books that either tell true histories of protest or have, anti-racist protests, et cetera, represented in pages of fiction. We're seeing parallel legislation that is talking about how protest needs to be squashed. Only certain people get to participate in it. What right police have to harm protesters, et cetera. When we have book bans that say that trans people are age inappropriate, that they shouldn't be represented among school library shelves or in curriculum. We are seeing parallel legislation that not only denies the bodily autonomy, but even not just a person's right to control their body, but a person's right to control their identity is also being legislated. And that is only a small hop and skip to anybody else's bodily autonomy, any other marginalized gender's bodily autonomy. This is very much how much heat can we apply before they notice that they're boiling. And we are boiling. It's enough. It was enough 30 years ago, 20 years before that, and 40 years before that. Enough.
Well, I do want to take the time to thank everyone. It's really been good to, I think, delve into these concepts and pull the threads apart a little bit. And I hope that as we talk through these things today, that those of you that join us have been given something to chew on a little bit more and to self-reflect. Because again, when we talk about banning these things, the underlying connecting thread there, that what connects all of this is this complete decision to gloss over, right? To erase and to take away any need for reckoning, any need for evaluation, any need for critique. And I do think what Kyle has stated is, again, important to repeat, that it's not so much sometimes that we don't know the history, it's that we have turned our back. And now we are moving forward in a very terrifying way. And so as a parent, as a caregiver, as a community member, remember that you should care about these things beyond intellectual freedom and the right to read being a core value, but also because it is going to limit the empathy of those living in your community, the ability of our kids to grow up as global citizens. And that is the world we are moving forward into if we're not there already. It's going to minimize your ability to have the number one skill that every single time we survey employers we get, which is team, ability to work in a team, ability to bond with others, ability to complete group work, ability to connect with, we all know how much we hate group work. So believe it or not, reading helps you with your group work. But but again, weakening what has been taken away from us is this idea of who the parental role is, who takes up the parental role, who has the right to be human. So I hope that as you listen to our conversation today, that brought up some things for you to chew on and think about and really connect with, so that you are motivated to go forth and take some of the steps that Meenal outlined, Stacey outlined, Liz outlined, Keon outlined. I hope that you listen to Tierney, who here is like our proof that this is absolutely impacting our kids. And so thank you everyone for taking the time. Kyle, thank you so much for your expertise and for also just for the creative works that you have brought into our children's lives. And I end on what I hope is a call to action. We will be launching soon the Get Ready, Stay Ready toolkit. There will be resources there curated and selected to help you as a parent and as a community member to address these challenges, not just with books, but with curriculum, with search terms, with databases, with other educational resources. And we're going to absolutely really smush in all kinds of resources that you can use in that toolkit. And Stacey, do you have anything you want to highlight that we might have in that toolkit? I'm totally taking you by surprise here, but we'll have tracking legislation. We're working with other organizations to pull in their resources as well. So we're excited to throw that out there and have you explore and use it to maximum benefit.
Yeah, I think this is one way to say it is that we are calling on the community, but very much as a community effort. This is not about folks as individuals, folks watching this that have been nodding along, that have heard the confirmation of their own values, of their own fears being echoed here and want to do something. It is not on you as one single person. The only thing on you is to step up and decide to do something. We want our toolkit to be a way to bring you together in community, because the power is in the togetherness, that coordination, that collective outcry and collective pushback. And so yes, scripts of what to say when you line up at the school board, when you decide to take up space in defense, where you can buy the books that do get taken away or that are targeted, ways you can send nice and hopeful messages to authors who are under threat of being targeted, to let them know that their work matters and that they should continue on. And to again reemphasize that we are very much the majority. We are the ones whose values represent most of the folks in our society, and that is not insignificant. As we move forward together, it is only about coordination and preparation, and that's what we want this toolkit to help uplift.
Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your evening, or forward on to any new adventure that you have in line. And I wish everyone a great rest of their day.